another episode of the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For today's episode, I had the opportunity to interview Douglas Robbins. Douglas is an author, op-ed writer, and podcaster. Douglas is the author of the Narican science fiction series and the novel Love in a Dying Town. Additionally, Douglas hosts the Den of Discussion podcast, and several months ago wrote an op-ed on his blog about the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm here with Douglas Robbins, who is an author, op-ed writer, and podcaster. Douglas, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
My name is Douglas Robbins. I've been writing for 20 plus years. I have about a half dozen books out there, often about the disenfranchised and people trying to live meaningful lives, often things that are sort of swept under the rug. And I have a sci-fi book as well about the evolution of souls. Previous book before that was called Love in a Dying Town, about factory towns and people struggling there but still trying to make a living and make a life at the same time.
Now, without spoiling too much of your science fiction series, Narican, did I pronounce the name of the series correctly?
Narican. Narican is the name of the planet.
Okay, Narican.
Yes, sir.
Now, you've written one book in your series, and I assume there's going to be more in the series.
Yeah, the next one should be out sometime later this year.
Okay, and
Hopefully.
What is your first book and then your second book, as well as the series as a whole, about?
The series really is about sentient beings and the evolution of souls and the battle over souls developing or the ceasing of that. So it's a little bit of world building. The first one, Narican, starts on planet Earth, and strange things starts happening to this main character, and he eventually learns that he's actually from another planet, that he was a surrogate or was born through surrogates on this planet to protect him, because he's the last of the light beings from Narican who had been infiltrated by the dark forces. So ultimately, like I said, the book is about us, basically, people who are torn, who want to live a better life, want to evolve, but often feel stuck with doubts and negative self-talk, preventing us from moving on. But ultimately, the story is about the evolution of souls, and if the dark forces or the toxic whisperers win, that will stop the evolution of souls and submerge humanity into eternal darkness.
Now, you mentioned during your introduction that you've written a novel called Love in a Dying Town. Is that fiction or nonfiction? And was the dying town in your book based on like a real-life city?
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a great question because it's fictional yet very real. So it was actually based upon the issue that was going on with Flint, Michigan a few years ago, and is still going on. Sort of an old factory town, and they had a lot of water issues, and a lot of the water was bad, and people were getting sick. A lot of the pipes were just rusted out. And I started thinking, like, you still have to live there. You still have to raise a family. You still have to teach your children right from wrong. And I figured, like, what an interesting backdrop that would be to a story. So it's not really about Flint, Michigan. There's nothing about water issues in the story, but it's about a factory town, about that American dream that's eluding people, foreclosures, etc. But still trying to be a good man, this single father, and still trying to raise his daughter and show her right from wrong. And he also has ambitions and wants to leave and wants to build skyscrapers. But he can't. He's kind of stuck in this town. So ultimately has to overcome a lot of adversity and, again, protecting his daughter in this sort of crumbling infrastructure. But ultimately it's about redemption and interconnectedness, people caring for each other to help you get through the next day.
Now, you also are, if I understand correctly, currently writing a nonfiction book titled "I Have a Pebble in My Shoe." Is that correct?
Yes, and this is something I've been writing on and off, probably more off in recent years. Um, and this is more, yeah, nonfiction, more philosophical musings, observations, and really it started when I was probably late teens or something. And it was just these little observations about law or about the environment or about individuality or government or whatever it might be, nature. All sort of the pillars that affect our lives. And so I have a pebble in my shoe. It's funny because I had started writing it, like I said, just observations, like, oh, that's interesting. And then I was like, what kind of writer are you? Like, you're an observation, right, a note-taking guy? Like, what does that mean? And I realized that all of the ideas, there's a thread that runs between them all. And that is, again, once again, humanity, the human condition. Can we do better? Can we have better ideas, better laws, better infrastructure? And the answer is, of course, yes, because so much of what has developed has really just developed over the last few hundred years, consumerism, capitalism, etc. And that's all fine, but there's also a time to move forward and reevaluate. Just because you've been doing something for however long doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. So that's what I Have a Pebble in My Shoe is about, is really the individual growing and society evolving as well.
Now, are all your books self-published, all your books traditionally published, or do you have some books that are self-published and others traditionally published?
I have most of my stuff is self-published. I have a few short stories that are traditionally published, but earlier on, I probably was a little impatient, and I had sent out a manuscript, and you hurry up, you kill yourself to write a story, and then it's a hurry up and wait situation, which to me didn't really make a lot of sense and didn't really add up. So I'd sent a number, this one book out called The Reluctant Human, and got form letters back if I got anything at all. And I realized, like, this is crazy. Like, in this day and age, I don't need the gatekeepers, the agents. And so much has changed in the publishing industry in the last 20 years anyway, that a lot of them just want to publish big names and aren't really interested in somewhat giving, lesser names or no name a chance. So I started just saying, forget this. I'm going to control my own destiny and, take the bull by the horn, if you will, and self-publish.
Now, if you have a typical writing routine, what is that like for you?
Writing is a muscle like anything else, and you really have to stay at it. You have to be consistent. If you want to get big and strong working out, you got to work out, right? So writing, to me, every day is pretty essential. Obviously, there's some days I don't write, or a couple days might go by. But lately, for the most part, I've been writing every day, and I typically like to write the most in the mornings because I'm clearest. The world hasn't infiltrated my thoughts, and I'm not worrying about bills and 14 other things. So when you're fresh and clear in the morning I think, is the best time for creativity. Because again, like I said, you're not muddled by too much stimuli coming into your mind.
Now, on your website's blog, you posted an op-ed piece you wrote about the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
When was that written? And you had some very strong opinions about that subject.
It was written several months ago. Probably before, I can't remember exactly, but it was definitely several months ago. That we were providing aid, and I was very proud of us and the world saying, no, you've gone too far. You've attacked all these other, basically, sovereign nations. And I was very proud that the U.S. and many nations said, no, we're drawing the line in the sand here. But yeah, Um, you know, America, we like to always tout ourselves and freedom and the love of liberty and all these things. It's like, well, that's great, but you have to put your money where your mouth is. You have to act upon those convictions. You can't have convictions and then sit on your butt on the couch, because those aren't convictions then. Convictions are when it is ugly, when it is tough, that is when you hold firm and say, yes, this is my belief and this is what I must act upon.
Yeah, and I remember during the early days of the Russian invasion where the U.S. government wanted to more or less allow Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, to flee to the United States in exile, and he said he needed ammo, not a ride.
Exactly, yep. Right, he has galvanized the world, right? He is the inspiration of what we all aspire and claim to be.
Now, you host a podcast called Den of Discussion, is that correct?
Yes, sir, yep.
Now, what types of guests typically appear on your podcast, and what types of subject matter is typically discussed in a typical podcast episode on Den of Discussion?
So it's a wide-ranging show. Again, anything that really touches the human condition. I've had sustainable building people on it. I've had attorneys on it. I've had obviously writers on it. I've had psychics on it. I had a gentleman who was an investigator in the dark web, or on the dark web, which I thought was so fascinating. We had one gentleman, so it touches, the scope of humanity. I had a gentleman who had broken his back and overcame it with thoughts, basically, healed himself, even though his doctor said he was never going to walk again. So I had him on, and he went on to then become a stunt coordinator in Hollywood. Pretty crazy. I had a blind singer-songwriter on. So it's really about the human story, if you will. But the thread, once again, is about overcoming challenges, the disenfranchised. How are we moving forward? Those are the things that fascinate me. So when I first started the show, it was really more about writing and having writers on and publishers, etc. But as I grew through it, it morphed into more my interests: spirituality, creativity, the education system, how, we're so focused on IQ, and that's fine. It's important to know history and math, etc. But that doesn't mean you're going to live a fruitful life. If you are emotionally traumatized by something or harmed and have these very terrible doubts and limiting beliefs that stop you, it is very hard for you to live a fulfilling life because of this emotional quotient, or EQ. And so that we've had discussions on the show about that. EQ instead of IQ, or both. Because, let's say you had some traumatic event happening in your life, or your family is causing you trauma. You're going to have a lot of issues as you go out of school and into the world. Well, I think this is a great opportunity that education teaches both the IQ and how to address the EQ, because by the time then you get out of high school or college, you are ready to be an adult, because I'm sure many people are adult babies who never grew up or never developed and have been sort of living the same life for many years because of whatever happened way back when.
Well, Douglas, you were a wonderful guest for this podcast. It's always great to interview a fellow author and podcaster, and I thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author Podcast.
Aaron, it's been such a pleasure. You have a great day.
Douglas was a wonderful guest for this podcast, and I hope you all listen to his podcast, Den of Discussion. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at AuthorAAC and on Instagram at AACScribe. Copyright 2023, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.